Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Monsters Manifested, right here on DM Tools with MaxMcCool. On today's episode, we're going to be continuing our journey through the devil monster types with the Bone Devil. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. The Bone Devil's stat block can be found on page 71 of the Monster Manual, and its lore can be found on page 68. So, let's begin there. Bone Devil, also known as Ozolith. Driven by hate, lust, and envy, Bone Devils act as the cruel taskmasters of the Nine Hells. They set weaker devils to work, taking special delight in seeing fiends that defy them demoted. At the same time, they long for promotion and are bitterly envious of their superiors, attempting to curry favor, though it irks them to do so. A Bone Devil appears as a humanoid husk with dried skin stretched tight across its skeletal frame. It bears a fearsome skull-like head and the tail of a scorpion, and a foul odor of decay hangs in the air around it. Though they are devastating in combat with their claws, Bone Devils also wield hooked polearms made of bone, which they use to subdue enemies before striking with their venomous tails. And that's all we got when it comes to the Bone Devil and its lore. So, once again, relatively straightforward and simplistic. They provide a little bit of information in terms of their disposition, in that they long for promotion, but they hate having to seek it out or work for it, and they are envious of their superiors to a point of bitterness, all the while still being more than happy to enact or see the demotion of other devils into lesser ranks in the hierarchy. But I think that there's still some stuff there that we can work with and develop around in order to create something compelling and interesting for the players at our table for our next session. But before we get into all of that, let's move on to the stat block. The Bone Devil is a large fiend, devil, with a lawful evil alignment. It has an armor class of 19, which is natural armor. It has hit points that average 142, or 15d10 plus 60, and it has a movement speed of 40 feet as well as a flying speed of 40 feet. The Bone Devil has a strength of 18, a dexterity of 16, a constitution of 18, an intelligence of 13, a wisdom of 14, and a charisma of 16. Its saving throws include intelligence plus 5, wisdom plus 6, charisma plus 7. Its skills include deception plus 7 and insight plus 6. It is resistant to the damage type of cold, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical weapons that are not silvered, and it is immune to the damage types of fire and poison. It is also immune to the poisoned condition. The Bone Devil has the senses of dark vision for 120 feet, and a passive perception of 12. It speaks the languages of Infernal and telepathy for 120 feet, and it is a challenge rating of 9. Onto the abilities. Devil's Sight. Magical darkness does not impede the Devil's dark vision. And Magic Resistance. The Devil has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Onto the actions. Multi-attack. The Devil makes 3 attacks, 2 with its claws and 1 with its sting. Claw is a melee weapon attack with a plus 8 to hit, a reach of 10 feet on one target. On a hit, it does an average of 8 or 1d8 plus 4 slashing damage. Sting, also a melee weapon attack with a plus 8 to hit, a reach of 10 feet on one target. On a hit, it does an average of 13 or 2d8 plus 4 piercing damage, plus an average of 17 or 5d6 poison damage, and the target must succeed on a DC 14 Constitution saving throw, or become poisoned for 1 minute. The target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. And that's it for the standard version of the Bone Devil's stat block. There's also a little bit of text above it that provides a variant for the actions of the Bone Devil, implementing the polearm. So let's quickly go through that and see what it has to offer us. Variant, Bone Devil Polearm. Some Bone Devils have the following action options. Multi-attack. The devil makes 2 attacks, one with its hooked polearm and one with its sting. Hooked polearm is a melee weapon attack with a +8 to hit, a reach of 10 feet on one target. On a hit, it does an average of 17 or 2d12 plus 4 piercing damage. If the target is a huge or smaller creature, it is grappled with an escape DC of 14. Until this grapple ends, the devil cannot use its polearm on another target. And that's all we got when it comes to the variant stats of the Bone Devil. So a fairly straightforward monster. I'm seeing a little bit of an idea here with the Bone Devil in the way of utilizing it as a monster. It seems very evident that this type of devil is not necessarily interested in the progression of the army of the 9 hells in collecting the souls or anything like that. This appears to be more of a captain or general, if you would, within the ranking systems of the devil hierarchy, in that it's constantly seeking out promotion, resentful of its superiors, and that it has to work to impress them and therefore be granted an advancement in rank, whilst simultaneously being elated or more than happy to witness the downfall and demotion of lesser forms of devils. But either way, we'll make what we can of this monster and hopefully come up with something compelling and intriguing and fun to play for our upcoming sessions. So without further ado, let's move on to some adventure crafting. Okay, so the first thing that comes to mind when thinking of a Bone Devil and how to implement it for an adventure would be to utilize it in the way that it is suggested or described in its lore, in that these Bone Devils behave as these sort of cruel taskmasters of the hells and put lesser devils to work in favor of their own gains. So the way I could see a Bone Devil being utilized is something in the way of a sort of boss monster that you would implement after your players have gone through contending with and overcoming some lesser demons, in which you could implement things like the Barbed Devil or the Bearded Devil, stuff like that, where they are sort of enacting the will of the Bone Devil in either the collection and harvesting of souls to bring down into the 9 hells and to expand the armies of Asmodeus, and obviously to increase their reputation and favor and perception of themselves by these higher ranking devils and archdevils and stuff of that nature. So you could develop something where perhaps utilizing some of the ideas of the previous episodes with devils in the Barbed Devil and the Bearded Devil, you could create a through line of reasoning or objective for them where they're doing what they are doing in order to serve and appease the Bone Devil in hopes for perhaps their own promotion into the higher ranks of the devilish hierarchy. And in that, you could have a nice chunk of adventures where your players are going through these different towns or adventures or environments and taking down these smaller devils until perhaps a pivotal moment or perhaps an instance where the Bone Devil is fed up with the failures of its subordinates and therefore decides to take on the issue itself and presents itself for your players to contend with directly. Another way that you could utilize the Bone Devil would be as a direct opponent in the sense of another sort of villain or individual in opposition to your players. So you can go back to the traditional concepts of something like a necromancer or a mad wizard or sorcerer who has struck a deal with this Bone Devil in exchange for their soul, where they are granted some boon of power, capability, success, what have you. And you can then develop something around that where perhaps this individual has proven highly successful in their discoveries, in their research, in their advancement. You could always go back to an individual hungry for power that is utilizing the abilities granted to them or the gift granted to them by the Bone Devil in order to take over more ground or territory, perhaps to take over some form of resource or facility that produces or develops or refines certain resources, all in exchange for their own soul and perhaps the souls of other individuals. And with that, you can again generate a number of adventures where your players have to contend with different enemies before getting to the point where they must contend with this evil sorcerer or wizard, or even something to the tune of an academic elite who has sold their soul to the Bone Devil in order to make some form of breakthrough in their research. And now that that has taken place and they've proven to become famous or successful or highly regarded, they're beginning to become corrupted, or perhaps the Bone Devil has presented itself and is now requesting for its end of the bargain to be met. So you have the utilization of this research or discovery being implemented in order to cause havoc or chaos, or perhaps just harvest these souls. Perhaps that was the plan of the Bone Devil the whole time, was to give this individual the ability to successfully discover and create this refinery or something to that effect. However, the actual purpose of the refinery, or the function of it rather, is really that it takes people and drains them of their souls, and they just become husks of individuals, or they die on the spot, stuff like that. You can implement rumors of people going missing. You could implement rumors of people going to this facility and interacting with this individual who perhaps has presented themselves as a benevolent individual, helping the community. And in fact, what they're doing is bringing them in, running this operation on them, or this sort of nefarious ritual, if you would, and absorbing their souls from them and letting them go sort of drained and empty of what they used to be. And that could also lead to perhaps a city or a town that's left in dire straits, because now that individuals have had their souls stolen away from them, perhaps they lack any form of rational or critical thinking. Perhaps they are now just subject to the desires of their limbic system, so they just destroy and pillage and take what they want, when they want, as they want. Perhaps even communication has disintegrated and deteriorated to the point where there's no more interaction or success in any aspect within this settlement. You know, perhaps the players enter the tavern and the tavern is filthy, or the inn is filthy. There's no one there to help the players out or to sell them or rent out a room for them or a meal or anything. There's just perhaps piles of bodies, or it looks like the entire area has been upended, like someone went in and trashed the place. And you could present something like that where the players have to figure out what's going on in this town. Meanwhile, where there's this sort of destruction and demise of the general environment and the people that have sort of degenerated into this bestial, irrational, feral form, whilst there's a large tower or this large structure that seems pristine and in amazing shape, where the researcher resides and practices their nefarious deeds, all in service and favor to the Bone Devil, of course. Finally, another way that you could utilize a Bone Devil is one that I've implemented for one of the adventures in the campaign I was running many moons ago. And I used the Bone Devil as a resource for the players to collect, if that makes sense. So to give you a bit of pretext, part of the campaign that I had implemented for my players involved them traversing different dimensions and planes of existence in order to collect certain specific items that they needed in order to unlock a sort of vaulted door and free an individual from the inside. And one of the items that they needed to collect was the venom sac from the stinger of a Bone Devil. And so it was a very simple implementation of a monster that I thought would be fitting for the difficulty and the necessity of opening up this vaulted door, because they couldn't just use any form of venom. They couldn't just use any form of venom sac from some other type of venomous monster or poisonous creature. It required the specific, highly corrosive, infernal venom present only in the stinger of a Bone Devil. And it also added a layer of complexity, I thought, to the adventure and the encounter, where the players had to contend with the Bone Devil and defeat it and overcome the Bone Devil, all while trying to maintain a level of caution as to not destroy or damage the venom sac itself, either during combat or after combat had taken place, and they needed to effectively remove it, cut it off of the devil itself. So having said all of that, I think that you could certainly use a Bone Devil in that way, which is a bit more of a monster of the week, sort of plug and play type of creature or type of way to implement a monster that you think is cool or would present a different challenge for your players. Even if you don't necessarily have the thematic or narrative means of presenting it, you can always generate a reason for your players to contend with a monster. And the reason I used was the gathering of a specific resource, in that of the venom sac for the Bone Devil, which they successfully accomplished and managed to extract the venom sac without damaging it after some successful medicine checks and some help. And that brought them that much closer to completing their various tasks and the various journeys that they had to go on if they wanted to be able to successfully unseal this vault or this vaulted door and see what resided within. All in all, though, I think the Bone Devil is a pretty interesting monster. It's one of the cooler looking devils that I've seen so far. It's probably the most nightmarish, if you would, of the devils that I've seen. The bearded devil was a lot more humanoid than anything else. The barbed devil seemed a lot more monstrous, but in a sort of believable material plane kind of aberration type of monster, whereas the Bone Devil looks like a devil monster quite accurately. And its polearm variant is interesting, and I could see how it would be utilized in a cool way if you were to use a Bone Devil in something to the tune of like the general of an army of lesser devils, or even in the way of it being some sort of head honcho of something, perhaps an evil organization, perhaps a group of cultists that has performed a ritual to summon a Bone Devil and sacrifice themselves to it, and the players go in and intervene, but it's too late. The Bone Devil is present on the material plane, and now they have this sort of highly adept, combative devil to contend with. So I think that both sides of that coin, the standard fair stat block as well as the variant actions, could both be beneficial or both be intriguing to use, even if you were to go with perhaps the standard fair Bone Devil for one encounter, and then it flees, or the players overcome that one and they now have to contend with another one that has a polearm rather than just the claws and the stinger, or the same one that returns to give your party a bad time in the future now that it has built up some martial prowess, let's call it. But either way, that's all I got for you fine folks when it comes to the Bone Devil. I'd like to thank you all very much for tuning in. On the next episode of Monsters Manifested, we're going to be covering the Chain Devil, so that should be a pretty cool one. We'll see what we can make with that, and hopefully it'll prove to be interesting and compelling and hopefully fun if implemented. But as usual, please follow the podcast, rate the podcast, share the podcast with whoever you can, anyone who may want some creativity assistance, anyone who may be having a hard time with developing an adventure with a specific type of monster that they want to try out. And it will simultaneously help the podcast out, help me out. I'd appreciate it a lot. Leave a review wherever you can. Let me know what you think, whether you like or dislike what I'm doing, and perhaps some reasons why on either side, as I'd be curious to know, and I'd appreciate the input. If you're listening to this episode of Monsters Manifested on YouTube, I'd kindly ask that you subscribe, like, comment, share, hit that notification bell, all those magic buttons that do amazing things apparently, as it would help the channel grow, help the podcast grow, help it get to the eyes and ears of more people who may need some assistance once again in developing adventures for their own table or for their own campaign, or for anyone who may be new and might not know how to potentially utilize these monsters or monsters similar to them for their first few adventures as they get their feet wet in the whole concept of DMing or GMing a tabletop RPG. But with all that being said, thank you all very much once again for tuning in. I'm MaxMcCool, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good day, everyone.